Okay, geweldig. So we learned yesterday about someone who was going to buy his lulav and esrog in honor of Sukkot, just like we're going to do this year, and it's a year of Shemitah. The Mishnah says that he needs to get the merchant to give him the esrog for free, because you're not allowed to buy an esrog. You're not allowed to buy fruits of Shemitah from a Nama Oretz, because we're afraid that he's going to put away the money into a savings account. And all of the fruit of Shemitah, as well as anything that you bought from the fruit of Shemitah. So for instance, if you give me fruits of Shemitah and I pay you money, that money also has the halachas of Kedusha Shvius, cannot be stored and put away. It has to be used for food on the year of Shemitah. It has to be completely eliminated by the time there's no such type of fruit, hefker, lying in the fields. So therefore, if you buy an esrog, even though we buy our esrog today from Talmidei Chachamim, the halach is you're not allowed to pay for the esrog, and therefore you have to ask him to give it to you for a gift. The Gemara says he might not want to give it to you for a gift. So tell him, I'm willing to give you any price you want for the lulav, and then you could throw in the esrog. It's like when people go to the store, they get something on sale, 2 for the price of 1. What it really means is 2 for the price of 2. It just meant until that sale, they were buying 1 for the price of 2. And now they're getting 2 for the price of 2. So my wife was in the dollar store yesterday and she spent $50. So they told her, oh, since you spent $50, you get a free box of masks. So my wife said, I don't want the box of masks. But they told my wife, well, you have to take it because we have to get rid of it. So that was 2 for the price of 2. Anyways, so the question that the Gemara had is, why is there a problem of Shemitah buying the esrog any more than there's a problem of Shemitah buying the lulav? A. And B is, this esrog that you bought for Sukkot, chances are, even if you cut it from the tree a couple of days before Sukkot in the Shemita year, but most of its growth and its blossoming was before the Shemita year. So why b'chalal is that a problem of Shemitah? So the Gemara answers that our Mishnah holds that when it comes to identifying which year the esrog is from for the purposes of Shemitah, our Tana holds it goes Basar de Lakita. We had 2 Tanoim who argued. Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer both argued. And they held maybe for Meiser, one of them held maybe for Meiser, you can look at the esrog that its main growth is the year that it was picked. But both Rabbi Eliezer and Gamliel hold that Lagabi identifying which year of the Shemitah cycle the esrog comes from, you look at when it blossomed. Our Mishnah is a Shita Siyachid that holds that you look at the esrog as to when it was picked. That identifies what year of Shemitah it's related to. And that's how I hate the problem. Mashenk in the lulav, we look at its primary growth, which was for sure before the 2 weeks of the year that led up to Sukkot. It was for sure, its main growth was before that, which would have been in the prior year, which wasn't the Shemitah year, like we are now. That's how the Gemara remained. Then the Gemara asked, B'chalal, why would there be an issue of Shemitah at all on a lulav? A lulav is like firewood, or like a broom, or whatever it is, but it's not a meichel. And we understood at first glance that the only types of produce that grow that are covered with the halachas of Shemitah are things that you can eat. And for that, the Gemara answered, no, it's totally in the characteristics of something that you could eat. And the characteristics of something that you could eat, which we learned at the end of the Gemara, was the concept of mishahana asai ubi urei shava. Eating is unique. Why? Because you have hana from it while you're actually consuming it. They're happening at the same time. But firewood, when you use firewood, while the wood is flaming, that's not when you're benefiting from the wood. Once the flame dies down and it's a coal, that's when you benefit from the wood. Nowadays, people don't remember what it's like to have a charcoal barbecue. because we just flip on the propane or flip on the natural gas. But with a real barbecue was when you would cook out the coals, and after the flame died down, they would glow red hot for a couple of hours. So the hana that you have from the coals are after they're burnt. So the hana is after the beer, and therefore firewood would not be covered by the halachas of Shemitah. So the Gemara suggested that a lulav is not different than firewood. And that the Gemara answered, no, a lulav is primarily used for a broom. A broom means you sweep the floor with its leaves, right? Now, when you're sweeping, as you sweep, the leaves get run down. They disintegrate. You have a very old broom, there's almost no bristles left on it because as you're sweeping, it grinds them down. So to the lulav, as you sweep, as you use it, it's becoming consumed. So therefore, the lulav has the same characteristics as food, meaning it's consumed as you're benefiting from it, and therefore the lulav is subject to all of the rules of Shemitah. And the last thing we learned was a Mishnah that was quoted right in the middle of Mem Amud Aleph, so we're a little bit ahead of the game. And I want to draw your attention to the Mishnah about 3 inches down from the top of Mem Amud Aleph, if you have a full-size Gemara. And the Mishnah says as follows: if you had the leaves of kanim, I'm not sure exactly what type of tree that is. If anybody, maybe it's a cane tree. If anybody has an article to tell me what the definition of kanim are. Aligafanim are leaves from a vine, from a grapevine.
Cane reeds.
Cane reeds. Okay, thank you. Which Rashi tells us is he stored it on his field. Depending on what it was used for, would determine if it has a status of Shemitah or not. Loktan lachila, if you gather these leaves to eat, and it's not something that humans eat, it's things that's used typically as animal feed, Rashi says, but it's still something that you have enough of it from eating. So then yesh b'hem mishum kedusha shviyos. It will be subject to all of the halachas of shviyos. But loktan la'etzim, if you only gather these because your intention was to use them as firewood, then ein b'hem mishum kedusha shviyos, because of the problem of it's not hana asim of you in trouble. So the Gemara says, shiny hasam, firewood, which is the subject of the Mishnah we just quoted. It says, only when the hana and the consumption occurs at the same time. But firewood, the hana that you have from it is only after it's consumed. But the lulav you have enough from while it's being consumed, because a lulav is normally used as a broom. But what the Gemara just said over here is there are certain things, and Rashi clarifies, there are certain things like an apple, which there's no question about an apple that it's made to eat. And therefore, even if you decided that you want to use an apple as firewood, it doesn't matter. It still will have the kedusha of Shemitah. Or you can have a log. A log is not made to eat. A log is made to burn as firewood. So even if you're planning to eat that log, it doesn't change anything. It's for sure not going to have the halachas of Shemitah. Where you have something that you could determine its outcome is something in the middle, like alek kanim and alek fanim. It's not clearly defined what those are used for. Many people use it to use as animal feed, which would subject it to the halachas of Shemitah, and many people just use it as firewood. Since it's not defined what these are used for, therefore, depending on your intention, if you intend to use it for firewood, it would not be governed by the rules of Shemitah. But if you intend to eat it or to serve it as animal feed, then you would be governed by the halachas of Shemitah. In fact, the Gemara, once you're saying that things that have dual purposes, it'll depend on what it's actually being used for. Well, there was wood that's particularly oily wood, very oily wood, and it lights up like a torch. And people would use them not as firewood to heat their oven or to heat their home, rather they would use it as a torch to light their way. That's Hana Asanu Bira and Shava, because you're having enough of the fire and the fire is consuming the wood simultaneously. So maybe Eitzim Namashkan, oily wood, should be subject to the halachas of Shemitah. And that the Gemara said, Amarava stam eitzim la saka hein oilim. Wood, by default, even oily wood, by default is just used to heat your stove, to heat your oven, which is not hana asad shava. Sure, you could use this wood for a different purpose, but the default purpose we will still say is firewood. I'm not sure if anybody has an example of what type of woods are particularly oily woods. I'm not sure what those are. The article probably tells us what type of trees are particularly oily and work well for torches. I'm not sure what it's called. I see Avigdor's looking, so I'm going to wait till Avigdor can find the name of the wood. I never noticed a wood that was oily.
Was I missing something? It just says oily wood.
Oily wood. So
it doesn't.
The guy who wrote the article didn't either know what wood was oily. Okay, Shkoyach.
Yes, it could be pre-treated wood, like what you buy like in the gas station when you want to make your fireplace.
Not likely, because then when it grows, it's for sure not
pre-treated.
Later, it would still be by default not subject to the halachas of Shemitah.
That's right.
Yeah, I love those woods.
Tosfos and Baba Kama explains, but I don't know.
It's all sensitive.
Okay, Shkoyach. This is very controversial as to what this means. I'm going to learn like Rashi's first pshat, which Rashi likes better, and that is this whole shaila of whether or not we just made a whole opinion that firewood is not subject to the rules of Shemitah. Dr. Gemara now, that's not according to everybody. There are Tanoim who hold that firewood is subject to the halachas of Shemitah. There's a unique Rashi here, how he expresses it, so I just want to look at the Rashi inside. The Eitim da Saka Tanoihi. Zok Rashi, the Eitim da Saka Gufayu, Shanash and Achebiuram, wood, where we just stated that the Hanoah occurs after the wood is consumed, whether or not that's subject to the Yisurim of Shemitah, Tanoi, that's totally the Machlekes Tanoim, Hagabu Shvius Eloi. The Iko de Tana, there is a Tana, the Darish Lachem, Dima de Lachila. There is a Tana who learns that the Hana that you're allowed from Shemitah has to be Hana similar to eating. Lamute, to exclude. Kol Shana Asay Achabi, right? You're not allowed to use things that are governed by the rules of Shemitah as firewood. And that's where it eliminates wood from the rules of Shemitah. We're going to see in a moment that there's a Tana who says that wood, even though you don't have a na at the time of the consumption, nevertheless it's still subject to the halachas of Shemitah. But what is not subject to the halachas of Shemitah are things that most people don't use. Even though some people might need them, most people don't use, and the use of Shemitah has to be for widely accepted use. But malugma v'ziluf v'afaktoizim. Malugma is used as a medicine. Ziluf is when you're using something just to put it on fire so that you create a nice scent. And apaktoizim is if you're using something to cause you to throw up. And then I said, so you gorsim ustam etzim lasakin in the Tanoi. Rashi had a girsa that's goyrus, that the question is not if wood can be used for Shemitah. The question is it wasn't a question if wood is covered, the firewood is covered with the rules of Shemitah. The question is if I specifically have kavana on wood to use it as a torch, would it be subject to the rules of Shemitah? Or do you say no, stam eitzim is lasaka? But look what Rashi says, Tarachti minu urai v'chol sidei shites hashas, I've been hardening since my youth in every different way to understand it, liyashva kefri devrayim, to explain our Gemara according to this pshat, the Eini Yochel, I wasn't able to. The funny thing is that Tosfos quotes a Rashi in Hagoyzel Kama and Bava Kama, who actually explains it beautifully according to that other girsa, but there are kashas on it. But let's just keep the extent. I just wanted to look at Rashi because it was an interesting expression. I struggled my whole life, I couldn't figure it out. But we'll stick to the Pashat of Rashi. But the Machlokes is this rule that wood is not governed by the rules of Shemitah, because it's not on the Asanu Bi'ur and Shava, and by a stretch, you're only allowed to use the pairs of Shemitah for things that are Asanu Bi'ur and Shava. So you're allowed to eat an apple of Shemitah, but you're not allowed to use it as firewood, because once again, it will not be on the Asanu Bi'ur and Shava. This whole idea is a machlokes tonight. And let's see the Gemara. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, in Moisen Peiros Shvius, you're not allowed to use Peiros Shvius loy l'mishra v'loy l'kfusa, not to use it to create a solution in which to soak or clean clothing. Let's see Rashi, an explanation of specifically what that is. So Zok Rashi, ein Moisen Peiros Shvius loy l'sech mishra, lishrois pishtan beyayin shel Shvius. You're not allowed to soak flax or cotton in a solution of wine. And so I'm not sure why you would soak it in wine. I guess it had some benefit for the flax, or to wash it out. You shouldn't use the wine as the medium in which you wash your clothing. Mishra kvusa Rashi says. Whether you're soaking or washing in wine, there you're not having the at the time. You might think, what do you mean? What am I having at the time? While I'm soaking my clothing and ruining the wine, my clothing is benefiting from it. Zok Rashi, that's not how you look at it. Rather, this is how you look at it. Yes, the wine gets destroyed the moment, well, not the moment, when the gadim and the pishtan are in the wine for a little while, that ruins the wine. That's when that's when the wine is consumed, because it gets ruined. But the hana doesn't occur until later. But the hana that you have is only after you wear the clothing, which is a very interesting concept, because you're benefiting it. You're really benefiting as soon as your clothing benefits. As soon as your clothing are improved, you're benefiting. Why does Rashi say that until you actually wear it, you don't have that benefit? And that's something that Tosfos jumps on Rashi for. And I'm just going to quickly read the bottom Tosfos. Yotu misha v'kvusa shanas na'achiburin shemisha sheshara pishton oya begodim b'yayin sha'achas nispire v'avad hana'asoi v'avad kama v'hana'asoi einay achi yobush oisim begodim takpir shekum. Correct Tosfos v'tema the ba'agozel kama and b'avad kama we see kachashiv minat tzavuin hana'asanu b'uran shava. The Gemara says b'ferish that if you use anything to dye clothing with, that's hana'asanu b'uran shava. But based on what Rashi is saying, that even if you dye your clothing, we don't consider you having benefit until you actually wear those clothing. Based on Rashi's logic, it should be considered having another after the beer, should be uray b'shas tzviyah, because when you're using the solution to dye clothing, the dye is ruined during the dyeing process. But you don't wear it till much later. So by Rashi's logic, how do we understand the Gemara Bava Kama who considers dying an asana durin shava? According to the Manim there who held that there's the benefit of the samanim on the wool itself, it's good because by Mishra Kvusi you don't have it. When you're washing clothing and improving clothing, soaking it in wine, it's not like the wine remains on the beged. The wine was just used as a solvent to dissolve the dirt. But there is no wine that's remaining in the beged that's helping it. However, when you dye something, the dye is there. It remains there. So therefore, it's considered like your nose right away. That was one shot that Tosfos wants to offer. Ubekundras period sham, Rashi learned there, the minute tzavayim, when it comes to a dye, the shas rasichas hayoyra, kala hashayrish, when you cook up the pot with the roots that are providing the pigment, the root gets disintegrated. The koilet hatzeva bebeged, and the dye now moves out of it. It vacates the root plant that it came from, and it moves into a new location and moves into the beged. Therefore, the ana and the beer happen at the same time. The moment you put the clothing into the wine niskalkel unavayr, it ruins the wine. But the hanasa ene ad shloisha yamim or arba yamim sheyehei apishta and shari. So Rashi says over there a little differently. Here Rashi says the hana is only once you wear it. There Rashi says the hana is only once the clothing is soaked for a long time, only then do the clothing get improved. But the wine got ruined right away. Mashake in a dye, the moment the dye leaves the root, it actually gets into the beged right away. There's no time delay in between the beged benefiting and the dye being ruined. Mashenke, when you're using it as a detergent, it takes a little bit of time of soaking until your clothing benefits from it. Rashi here says the benefit is that you're wearing your shirt. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back. So talk to Gemara. I'm a little bit ahead of myself. Here we are. So you cannot use it for these things because it's not hana asan ubi'ur an shava, right? Rabbi Yosy, it's not a problem. You're allowed to use pairs of Shmita for that because even things that the hana is after the beer are also covered by the restrictions of Shmita, and therefore firewood would also be covered by the restrictions of Shmita. My timer, the Tanakama. What is for the Tanakama who hold that it needs to be hana asan ubi'ur an shava? So let's look at the pasuk because this is the crux of Shmita. Because the Ha'isa Shabbos ha'aretz lachem la'achla, the resting of the land should be for you to eat. So it says la'achla. So we learn from there that any hana that you have from the parish of Shmita has to be similar to achila, my time with Rabbi Yosy. So how does Rabbi Yosy get that you can use it for these things? It's not similar to achila. You have to Gemara Amar Kolachem, and it says lachem la'achla. So we learn from lachem lachol tzarchechem. You can use the Shemitah parish for any of your needs, and therefore parish that is used for any of your needs will also be covered by the rules of Shemitah. Even though it's not on the asan ubi'ur and shava. What does the Tanakama use the lachem for? They're focusing on the la'achla to say you're only allowed to have a no similar to achila, but it does say lachem as well. What is the Tanakama going to do with those words? Chulachem dumya l'achya. It means you can use it for any of your uses if it's a similar use to achila. Nisha nasu b'yori shava yatsu mishra kvusa shanasan achar b'ira. Rabbi Yosy, what about Rabbi Yosy aksiv l'achla? Rabbi Yosy is focusing on the lachem. You can use it for whatever you want, but it does. The Torah does say l'achla. It has to be an eating type of hana. How does Rabbi Yosy deal with that? I also agree that the uses that you're going to use Shemitah products for are limited to those that are similar to la'achla. But who said the limitation is your understanding, your Rabbanan? I have a different set of rules that we learn from achla, and that means it has to be something you eat, and it shouldn't be something that you use for other purposes, like malugma, like for a medicine. I believe Rashi at the bottom says malugma refuah. It means a medicine. Zogt the Gemara weiter. Kitanya, like we learned in the Brisa, la'achla v'loy l'malugma. Ata omer la'achla v'loy l'malugma. Ayne ela v'loy l'kfusa. Who said you should learn like Rabbi Yosy, maybe learn like your Rabbanan? So the Gemara, the Brisa, you omer lachem. It says lachem, meaning it's a broader use is allowed, even for your personal use that are not eating. Harei l'kfusa omer. So it seems to say that you are allowed to use it as a medium in which to wash your clothing. Hamani mekayim la'achla. So what is la'achla trying to limit? What type of activities is the word la'achla coming to limit? La'achla v'loy l'malugma. In fact, Gemara ma rais l'rabbis is a kvusa the hod is a malugma. Kvusa has a chesaron. It's not a nasa b'rishava. Malugma has a chesaron that it's not a food. Why do you pick one over the other? How do you know which one to include and which one to exclude? So Gemara mar ba'dis a kvusa. I'd rather say that kvusa is a use that is allowed. Everybody needs that use. So it's a widely accepted use. That's why I believe that should be included. Not everybody needs the refuah. So therefore, it's something that's not as it's a purpose. It's not as widely accepted. Therefore, I'd rather exclude pairs of Shemitah from being used for that. So now that we have a machlokes as to what the pairs of Shemitah can be used for, and by extension, which pairs are covered by the rules of Shemitah, let's pick a random brisa and figure out who is the Tana. Man Tana l'hada Tana Rabban. La'achla v'loy l'malugma. La'achla v'loy l'siluf. You can't use it to put wine on the fire, so it sort of evaporates it. It creates a nice smell in the home. Or la'achla v'loy lasas amina apetizing. You can't use it to make you throw up. Rashi drills down to see where you see that in the word. But the last 4 lines, Rashi says lahaki, why? Who been the trukin apik tveizan, to take out more food. Mazan ha'oichel yosim midai moitzi umeki. Someone who ate more than necessary, it allows it to expel his food. So it probably doesn't taste very well if it induces vomiting. Command Rabbi Yosy. This must be following the sheet of Rabbi Yosy, who hold that the limited use are the zilaf and the malugma, and not anas nubir and shava. The Rabbanan ha'ikanami mishra kvusa. According to Rabbanan, you can't do mishra kvusa either. Amar Belazer, ein shvis mischalelas ala derech mech. Now, when we hear of chilul, like you have hektish, so there's 2 ways to make hektish called a chulun. Either if it's your hektish, you take your money and say, I want the kedusha from this object to go on the money, and now the object is no longer hektish. The other way you can discharge hektish from a chayvitz is, if I have a chayvitz of hektish, I could sell it to you, and I could say, would you like to buy this hektish like a gizbar does? You give the Beis HaMikdash the money, and through that purchase, it also discharges the hektish. Zok the Gemara, Zok the Belazer, when it comes to Shmita, the only way you could take the kedusha off the fruits of Shmita is by selling it to somebody else. You can't redeem it yourself. Ein shvis mischalelas ala derech mekach. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. No, it doesn't make a difference. It's just like hektish. There's 2 ways, 2 transactions in which to discharge the kedusha of hektish, side by selling it, side by redeeming it yourself. It will work. My time with Rabbi Lozer. Why does Rabbi Lozer limit it to only derech mekach? He learns it from a pasuk. It says B'shnas haYovel azois tashuvu ishalachus asay, which is referring to Yovel, which Rashi says is just like Shmita, and Yovel and Shmita travel together. Shvis for Yovel chadahi, which Rashi says. The Samachle, and right after that it says V'chesim karu memkar. It talks about mechira. So we're darshan smuchin since the pasuk right after the discussion of Yovel and Shmita talks about selling. We learn that derech mekach v'loy derech chilul. The way to discharge kedusha and perish of shvius is through a sale, not just redeeming it with your own money. Rabbi Yochanan, who holds you could be mechalel as well, my timer. The chsiv ki yovel hi koydeshu. Let's see the pasuk inside, so we have clarity. The pasuk says ki yovel hi koydesh tiyalachem. So it compares yovel to hektish. Kodesh, ma kodesh, bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. Av shvius, bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. Just like hektish, you could be paida through a sale or through just redeeming it. So too, shvius is the same way. Rabbi Yochanan, haiki simkru mimkar, my ovidlay. Rabbi Yochanan, who learns that it could be through chilul or through mechira. The fact is, there are shmuchin. The pasuk of mechira is directly after the pasuk that discusses shmita. What does he extract? What information? What limud does he extract from that smichus? He uses that smichus to teach you a new halacha. The Tanya Amar Beis B'Chanina ba'u re'ei kamakasha of kashal shviyas. See how bad it is being over not the deraisa of shviyas, where you're actually planting. That's agaret. That's terrible. But even doing business with the parish of shviyas, even that, which is called avak shviyas, it's not the a very deraisa, it's just like they're abanon, even that is going to lead to terrible problems. Because Adam Noise, the Noise in the Perish Shvius, someone who does business with Perish Shvius, what happens after that? Right after that, the Torah discusses who sells. People sell when they need the money. Why do they need the money? Because he violated the avak. So Shvius, he wasn't super makvid on the lachas of Shmita. Was if Mokrish metaltlav as Caleb shenemar Mishnas hayovel azois tashuvu ishalachus asoi, and the samachlei, and right after that it says v'chisimkru memkar lamisecho. Rashi says Adam nois of a nois in the parish Shvius l'schayra, he does business with them. Then avak Shvius, The Iker Isser Shvius is like Sizra or like Sizmar, but just doing business with pairs of Shvius is Isser Kal. And Lasoif Moichas Metaltlav is Caleb Machmasaniyas. Why do you sell? You sell because you're poor. I was once giving Avram Weisbrot shir in Aguda South, and we were learning about the selling of land in Israel, Batay Chaima, Steachuza. So I was giving a marshal. Let's say Mr. Bleeman has a piece of land and he sells it to Mr. Iskowitz. And the whole shir started screaming, no, no, no. And I got afraid, like, what did I say wrong? And I said, Mr. Bleeman never sells that. So that's what's for the Gemara, that you only sell land if you need money, and it's not a good thing to have to sell, and you only have to sell loyalenu if, or not the only, but one of the reasons why someone has to sell loyalenu is because he wasn't makbid enough of hilchos shvius. So I guess you could deduce from there that mechalalav ata shemei hein, that people are very makbid on shvius, and in the kind of mitzvah of shvius, Hashem shares with them much ashiris, much bracha. We should all be zeicher to that. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says. Zok to Gemara weiter. Rabbi Lezer, high crowd, Rabbi Yechon, my other thing. What's Rabbi Lezer going to do with Rabbi Yechon's pasuk? It says ki kodesh. It compares Shemitah to kodesh, and kodesh you could be mechalo. When you buy look at the time, you believe kodesh. Ma kodesh teifes es damav, av shvius teifes es damel. Just like if you swap something for kodesh, whatever you swapped it with takes on to kedusha. So too, when you swap out shvius, whatever you swapped it out with will take on to kedusha. Tanya Kavos Rabbi Elazar, Tanya Kavos Rabbi Yechanan. We have a brayso that supports Rabbi Elazar that you could only sell shvius, and we have a brayso that supports Rabbi Yechanan that you could even redeem it on your own. Tanya Kavos Rabbi Elazar. Shvius teifes es damel. Shvius is teifes the money that someone buys shvius with. Shneimar says, "Ki yoyveli kodesh tiyolachem." Ma kodesh teifes adama v'aser av shvius teifes es damel v'asur. Just like kodesh, if you give money to buy something from Beta Kabayis, that money will now become aser b'anoah because it's mom and hektish. That's exactly what happens with shvius. In fact, Gemara, if that's how, if you're comparing shmita to kodesh, well, what about the next idea? Ima kodesh teifes adama v'yoytzel l'chulun. If I go to the Gizbar and I give him $100 to buy a beam from him that he had, now that beam is pure chulun. But we learned when it comes to Shemitah, it's not that way. When it comes to Shemitah, if I go to someone and buy pairs of Shemitah from him and I give him money, the pairs retain their kedusha and the money retains its kedusha. But if you're learning it out of kodesh, shouldn't you learn that once you redeem it, the pairs should lose the kedusha? It says in the pasuk. It's even after you redeem it, and even though the money that's given to redeem it takes on kedusha shvius, the peiros remain with their kedusha. That's the chiddush of Shemitah. You redeem it, and it's not redeemed. So exactly how does it work? Lokach b'peiros shvius basar. What if you swapped out peiros shvius for meat? The halach is elu ve'elu misparim b'shvius. They both have the din of Shemitah. The basar has the din of Shemitah because you redeem the pairs of Shemitah with the basar, and the pairs retain their status of kedusha shvius because the pasuk says tia. Now, what if you took the basar, which is already a second level of kedusha, because it only got its kedusha with the pairs, and then you swapped out the basar for dogim, you swapped out the meat for fish. So then yatsa basar v'nichnasu dogim. Then we say that the basar will lose its kedusha. So it's only the original fruit that never lose their kedusha. Once you go further down the line, anything you swap will lose its kedusha. Lokach b'dagim yayin, then yatsu dogim v'nichnas yayin. Lokach b'yayin shemen, yatsu yayin v'nichnas shemen. Haketzad. So what is the rule? The rule is achroin nichnas b'shvius. The last thing that you redeem will take on the kedusha of the pairs of shvius, and the original peri that started this whole chain reaction also remains us. Now that's what the brayso is halacha. But look at how the brayso describes the redemption of the Shemitah pairs. It's all lokach. It doesn't say chilel the basar dagim, chilel the dagim yain. All of these transactions the brayso expresses as a purchase. So the Gemara means the Ketani lokach since the only type of transaction described by the Brisa is a purchase when it comes to transferring the Kedusha off of the Truma, off of the Shvius item, you see from here, Alma derech mekachin derech chilaloi. You see the Tana doesn't even consider redeeming the Kedusha Shvius in the conventional redemption that was your own money. Rather, you see it had to come through a transaction of a purchase. So that supports Rabbi Lazar's position. Now, Tani Kavas Rabbi Yochanan, now also support Rabbi Yochanan's condition where Chilul is allowed. And this is much simpler. It says, Echad Shvius, Vechad Meiser, Sheni, Mischalin, Abei Mechayavoy. So use the word Mischalin. Mischalin means redemption. You're not selling it, you're redeeming it internally. So you see that Chilul works. Now, the Brasa goes weiter and says, Bein Chayin, Bein Schutim. You're allowed to put the Kedusha of Shvius and the Kedusha of Ma'aser Sheni on an animal, whether it's alive or dead. Divrei Meir. Al Schutin Mischalin, Al Chayin Ein Mischalin. You're not allowed to put the Kedusha of Meiser or of Shmita onto a live animal. You know why? Because if it's a live animal, then you're going to use it to breed, and you're not going to get rid of it on time. And Meiser and Shvius both have to be consumed by a certain date, and if you're going to be breeding with it, you're going to save it, and you're going to violate halachas. We're afraid you're going to use it to grow a adorim. So it's very important. Adorim means a flock. You want to build a flock and use it for breeding. It's very important to speak out two important things. Do you know what most people do with Mois Ma'aser Sheni when they come to Yerushalayim? They buy a carbon shlomim. That's a live animal. So Tosfos says, right at the beginning of the long Tosfos, says this that we're talking about, that you're not allowed to be machal or Ma'aser Sheni on a live animal, that's not in Yerushalayim. But in Yerushalayim, where the primary purpose of buying the animals of our carbon, avada, you're allowed. That's the first important piece of information. The second piece of information is what the Rav is about to tell us. The only time there's an objection and we're afraid so the only time where there's a machlokes and somebody does allow you to buy live animals, the only time there's a Tana who allows you, Rav Meir, the only time Rav Meir allows you to buy live animals is only b'zacharim. You're allowed to buy male animals. Everybody agrees you're not allowed to buy female animals. Why? You're going to buy primarily female animals to breed. I guess because one male can fertilize many females. So when you're buying a male, we're not so worried. But buying a female, that shows that you might have an inclination to breed it, and then you're not going to consume it, you're going to maintain it, and that's where the problem arises. This whole machlokes between Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yochanan as to whether or not you could just redeem it or if it has to be sold, that's the first original peri. So if I have the Shemita pears that grew and I want to sell them, that's where there's a machlokes whether I could be mechal internally or if I have to sell it to a third party. But once you're dealing, if I sold my pears of Shmita and I have now money, that money, divrei hakoil, bein derech mekach, bein derech chil. That I could redeem on my own. I don't need to do that through a sale. It's only the first transaction that has to be done through a sale. The Brisa, where we just brought a raya from, to Rabbi Lazar, talks about 4 or 5 transactions, right? You bought basar, you bought yain, you bought shemen, and by all the transactions, it uses the word lokach. The way we're saying, the way Rav Ashi is saying, once we pass the first transaction, it should have used the word chila. So Dr. Gemara, it's not a raya. I did the Tana Reisha Lokach, since the very first transaction had to come through a purchase, Tana Nami Seifa Lokach. The rest of the transactions were kept in the same fashion. But indeed, they could have used chilul as well for the future transactions after the very first redemption. Frank Gemara, Eisei Ravina Rav Ashi. Ravina asked Rav Ashi Akasha. What happens if you have a seller of shvius? How did you get the seller of shvius? It's very, very simple. What happened was you had pairs of shvius, you sold it to your friend, and now you have a seller. And the problem is it has kedusha shvius. But the problem is you don't need food. You need a new suit. You want to buy a suit with it. Now we all know you're not allowed to buy a suit with mois of shmita. You have to buy something that you'll consume, not something that will remain. So the question is, what gimmick, what loophole can I create to somehow benefit from the money? and not have to spend it on food. Kate said, yeah, so what should he do? He should go to a chenvini who he has business with, who would be willing to do this unusual transaction to help him out. And you should tell the store owner as follows: Tain li besela payers. I want you to give me payros, the value of the seller. So what's going to happen is the seller is going to become chulin, and the payers are now going to take on the kedusha. And then after he has this bushel of apples that have a kedusha of shvius, he gives it back. So the chemini will give him now a bushel of apples. Then the chayzer v'omer loy, then the customer that has the bushel of apples tells the store owner, I want to gift back to you these pears. I'm gifting you a bushel of pears that have a kedusha shvius. And the store owner wants to help out his customer, and he'll say, Halach selazu b'matana. I'm giving you this seller that you originally paid, I'm giving it back to you as a matana. Now, there was no redemption done over here. So therefore, the seller remains chulin in the hands of the purchaser, and the store owner has some extra food that he'll have to eat on time before the end of Shemitah. And now the customer, lokeach ben mashiyirtza. Now that he has a seller of chulin, he can purchase whatever he wants with that money. Affecting Gemara. This money that he had was not the original fruit. It was cash. It was already post-redemption. Yet, why do I have to go to a chenvini and do this deal with him? Let me do it internally. I'll go in my house and I'll say, okay, I'm swapping the kedusha for the money of the payers, and then I use the money. Why do I need to bechalal come on to a chenvini? Elamai, you see that even the second and third transaction, according to Rabbi Lozer, has to be done b'derech mekach umemkar. So Shver and Rabashi, you claimed otherwise. Rabashi, you're right. We'll have to change what I said, and that is as follows: Machloikis b'prisheni. The machloikis as to whether or not you could do it b'derech chilo, where Rabbi Yochanan says you could do it b'derech chilo, and Rabbi Lozer holds that also it has to be done b'derech mekach umemkar. That's only b'prisheni. But when it comes to redeeming the actual payers of Shemitah that grew on Shemitah, divrei hakoil derech mekachin derech chilo. There, even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that it has to be done through a purchase. I franked the Gemara when we brought a raya to Rabbi Yochanan that derech chilo is good. We had a brisa that says v'adikatani echad shvius v'echad ma'aseh mischalelin. That's what it said, which seems to be referring to the original payers. Now we're arguing. Now Rabashi is saying everybody agrees the original payers need to be sold, can't just be redeemed. On that you have to say my shvius, the may shvius. You have to say that it doesn't mean the actual pairs of shvius. It means if you have money that you've already been paid shvius with, that you can be mechalal. And I'll prove it to you that has to be the case. Because by meiser, it has to be that it's not the actual pairs of meiser that you're buying a behemoth with. Meiser mamish, if you want to say that the brisa is discussing actual meiser you cannot swap for a behemoth. The only thing you can swap actual meiser for is for cash. With cash, you can go ahead and buy a behemoth. But the meiser pairs themselves can only be swapped out for cash. So it must mean when the brisa discusses exchanging meiser for a behemoth, it must mean it must be referring to the money that you got when you sold the meiser. So too, it must be talking about the money that you got from shvius. But about the first transaction, when you have pairs of shemitah, the only way you could create a redemption is if you sell it, which we know doesn't really cause much of a redemption because the pairs always retain their kedusha. But at least it starts the chain reaction that you could then redeem the secondary cash. Okay, I guess we can stop here, and we'll be mamshech mitzvah tomorrow. Shkoyach, everybody. Have a wonderful day. To the brachas of Shemitah. It happens to be there's a person in our community who's an immensely wealthy person, and before he started his venture that made him very wealthy, he took on the Keren HaShvius, I remember it was like about to be 25 years ago. There was somebody who went from shul to shul to shul in our city, making appeals for people to contribute to carrying the shvius and to lease land in Eretz Yisrael so you could be kind of mitzvah shvius. And after that, he started the business and he became fabulously wealthy. But I don't know how it works up there, but the fact is he did do this and he did become very successful. So we should be zeicher to be mekayim in our way the mitzvah of Shmita 100% properly, and we should be zeicher to a shefa rat.
Amen. Shkoyach.
So,
Yeah.